Welcome to DASAR. My name is Darshan Doshi. DASAR is a community of doers. We aim to build a community of people who want to learn by doing and get inspired by people who actually achieve their goals and in the process achieve financial independence. Today I have a fantastic guest with me, a close friend, Patanjali Somayaji. He is the CTO of Capital Float. He's been a founder of Walnut Apps and Codito, amongst many other initiatives. Patan, you're a serial entrepreneur, a founder. You've built products all your life, right? And these are technology products, enterprise grade, as well as consumer tech products. When someone comes to you and asks, "Who is Patanjali Somayaji?" What do you say?
Yeah, ideally I'd like to be known as the person who does good photography. But from an entrepreneurship perspective, I think, I'd like to call myself an accidental entrepreneur because I didn't consciously get into building companies, right? It was an accident that our first company was actually a spin out of a place that I had joined for a job, but I joined and we kind of founded the first startup, right? But after that, the journey has been such that the excitement of building products from scratch, you find your calling, and so I think that has been my calling. I found my calling in building out that. So though it was accidental to start off, I don't see myself doing anything else. So I would call myself then really an entrepreneur from that perspective. It's the building of things that excites me, and the journey of actually building out a team, building out the product, and it's doing it multiple times has just reinforced that joy that comes from doing stuff.
You're operating in the FinTech space.
Right.
India has 2174 FinTech startups.
Wow.
That I read in a recent report.
Okay.
And Mr. Nandan Nilekani, he basically says India is at the cusp of financial inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
India, as we know, is going to change in the next coming decade, and that's primarily driven by digitization.
Right.
The digital infrastructure that the government has provided, the policy changes,
Right.
rollout of initiatives such as UPI, India Stack,
Right.
amongst many other initiatives, which I'm sure you are familiar
Right.
with and are operating with. So maybe we'll start up top. What is your view about the Indian FinTech space? What have you seen change in the last few years, and what do you see happening in the next few years? Maybe some of your thoughts on it.
Yeah. So, the whole, a lot has been said about financial inclusion in India, the infrastructure build out, and how, even if you look at things from the funding landscape or from the startup landscape and the number that you gave, it's just staggering that we're able to, absorb so much activity around the FinTech space. But if you look at it, you have to look at it in context of how we leapfrogged on the telecom space itself also, right? So while the rest of the world was doing 1G, 2G and building on, we did this leapfrog to 3G and data just because we started off behind everyone else, right? And I think a similar thing is happening in FinTech also. We started being, while if you look at the US, for example, penetration of branch banking is a long journey that went about credit societies in rural America and all of that, right? So there's a very set way, and then you look at the way credit cards with PIN verification came out in India, and the US took so long to just get adoption of that kind. Right? It's really because we kind of just leapfrog. When we put card machines, there were PIN card machines, and they just went around putting that. It wasn't that we had to go and change the whole country around, right? So that I think is a lot of that is happening in the FinTech space, right? The other cultural change that has actually benefited FinTech among even things like EdTech has been the fact that a normal Indian is very comfortable with a mobile screen, and the whole data journey and Geo and all of that, data ARPUs coming down and all of that, data prices in India are the cheapest, all of that is there. But the fact that an Indian consumer, there is no, we are leapfrog from desktops. If you look at, you don't see Indian FinTech saying we are building a desktop app or a desktop website, right? It's all about building Android. It's not even iPhone. It's all about like Android apps building out for the large scale. And it's really because of the cultural phenomenon that consumers in India are very comfortable doing anything and everything on the phone. You don't have to tell anything. Your 85-year-old grandmother is also on the phone, very comfortable with WhatsApp, and even looking and migrating to Signal right now. That's the kind of family conversations which are going on. And kids have taken to EdTech on phones. The number of people who are doing schooling on a mobile phone screen, right? We are lucky enough to give our kids laptops, but a lot of the kids are just doing it on the phone. And you look at companies that are doing credit for kirana shops and those kind of things, right? Everyone is just, it's very comfortable. Now that actually has allowed fintechs to be able to deliver services and banks to be able to deliver services in the whole mobile aspect. And I think that is a very big factor for why we have been able to leapfrog on the fintech side. So from a trends, and if you look at the policies that the government has put place, they have been very supportive. And this ecosystem has been built around the ability of consumers to use, I feel, more than anything else, right? So you have taken UPI to the consumer, but the consumer has also adopted the fact and is comfortable doing, QR code based payments. And I feel a good metric of adoption is the number of scams that are there along it, right? So the fact that there are call centers in some corner of the country scamming on UPI scams means that UPI has got enough adoption that now people are scamming on it, right? Even scams need like they need a market and they need a threshold of adaptability so that people are sufficiently confused. That I feel the primary driver has been consumers adopting mobile workflows. Data is one, but just being able to, it's a small screen. It's not like, it's not a very, if you look at most of the apps, while design of apps has made a progress in India, it's not like they're fantastic design or a lot of HCI thought has gone into it. They're simple screens, simple buttons, very simple use cases, focus on vernacular screens, the number of people using mobiles in Hindi and Marathi and all that is very large, we don't realize it.
The Indian government is also now putting together the account aggregator framework, and this is supposed to change the game.
Right.
So maybe some thoughts around what this framework means, and also in layman term, how will it impact both sides, the people, the banks, the companies, the consumers, and anyone in between.
Yeah. It's a very interesting. So what you need to do when you look at something like this, right, is if you look broadly at the things that are happening in India, a lot of it is happening around getting personal data, kind of unlocking that, and Nandan has spoken about it a few times, right? The fact that we have a lot of personal data and unlocking that data will be able to give us better goods and services and stuff, right? So maybe Aadhaar is like unlocking our identity in a sense. And the account aggregator is really, trying to pull your financial data out such that it is not locked in silos of your banks, but from a consumer perspective, you are able to put it in a suitcase and show that suitcase to whatever services you want to provide. If you see, even on the healthcare front, the government is trying to build up the healthcare stack, and that is also another form of unlocking your healthcare data and then being able to take it. So I think the change that will happen. So all of these have the ability to unlock use cases for consumers in ways that we don't really know today what would be, right? So there are the obvious cases that we have a loan here, you can take a loan there. Someone can look at, so today if you have to, for example, you get a housing loan, you have to take this paper, you have to take bank account statements and all of that. So the simple use cases, of course, instead of doing all that, you would just give access to the account aggregator user ID password, and people would be able to get that access to be able to underwrite you, right? So today's use cases are very obvious. And they are really driven around being able to do better financial services. Obviously, volume will drive costs down. You'll be able to have insurance portability, stuff like that. But I think the real use cases from these will come from stuff that we haven't really thought about, and that is the power of unlocking this data. As you bring this data out with the right frameworks, the right privacy, the right governance models, the right permission models, against, like I mentioned, the right scams, protection against all of those. At that point, you will see people being able to innovate on this data. And that innovation is something we don't really know what will happen today, right? People will innovate in all kinds of ways. And I'm personally very excited to see where account aggregator goes from that perspective. Obviously at Walnut, we're keeping a very, tight view on account aggregator. We do account aggregation by using SMS data today. We look at all your SMSs aggregated and give you it's all almost as accurate as what you would get from an account aggregator perspective. So obviously account aggregator becomes another data source for us, gives us a maybe slightly more accurate view of your data. And across the financial industry, all your services will start leveraging this data as the stack matures. But it's the next phase of this that I'm excited about, and that's something I don't know what will happen, but I'm pretty excited that a lot of nice stuff will come out at that point.
Excellent. I'm equally bullish about India over the next decade to 2 decades. We are roughly a $2 trillion economy moving towards a $5 trillion, $10 trillion economy. India has 650 million people who are using internet today. according to a report.
Right.
There are 350 million people using ATM for transactions. Now, I don't know how accurate these numbers are,
Right.
but that's just the number of users using Paytm is equal to the population of United States.
Right.
So I think things like the account aggregator framework, if they can really move it from say 600 or 300 million to 1.3 billion people, which is our population, and India is extremely diverse, right? You have India, you have Bharat,
Right.
you have tier 1, tier 3, you have the smaller villages.
I mean, if you look at the current discourse, then even
We are,
India is
we are a very multi-dimensional country.
Right.
Culture, language, food, money,
Right.
all of these. Right? And in this, so then the task of financial inclusion becomes that much more difficult.
Right.
And so then let's go to another base or the basic question. Today many of the reports kind of segment the fintech space as wealth, lending, amongst others, right? Insurtech, open banking,
Right.
blockchain. So how would you segment, given what you know and you've been operating in this space for a long time? How would you segment fintech in India?
Yeah, I would segment it as lenders and people who want to be lenders.
Okay.
So because it's basically if you look at fintech, really the bulk of the money is in lending, which is incredibly hard to do, and it looks very easy from the outside, but as through the Walnut and then the capital flow journey, we understand every aspect of lending it's not that straightforward. There's a lot of work involved, a lot of thought process, a lot of technology and stuff, right? So there's that. But all the money really, traditionally also if you look at it, all the banking money is in lending, right? And the rest of it is other income. And I think if you simplify the fintech space into that, you will then have a very different view of what every player plays out, right? So, for example, so let's say you're thinking of neobank. So it's a big thing now, right? Everyone's talking neobanks and stuff. So what does a neobank do? It gives you a skin over traditional bank, give you better customer service, etc., etc. And at the end of it, sells you financial service. And sells you financial service, the bulk of which is lending, right? So I find it easier to say, okay, are they going to do lending today? Are they going to do lending in 3 years? Are they building out an audience to lend later? That's the kind of framework, and I slot them in those. And of course, there are, there is the broad umbrella of financial services that you could segment it on, like InsurTech and all of that. But I think at the end, India is a very, it's not a super app market, but it's not a single app market either.
Right.
Like, Paytm is very popular, PhonePe is very popular, but they're all working to give you more use cases than just focusing on the payment use case,
Right.
But are they like the Chinese super apps? No, they're not. So we're kind of midway through those.
Just explain what Walnut App is in your own words,
Right.
And then what does Capital Flow do today, and then maybe also the funding journey of this unicorn.
Right. Yeah, maybe. So we started. So me and Amit started Walnut App 2014, and it was really built on a very simple premise, right? So at that time we were taking a break from our previous startups, and everyone was WhatsApping. For some reason I was sending Amit SMSs, right? So he was like, we sat for a coffee one day and he said like, why are you doing, everyone's on WhatsApp, what's wrong with you, right? And then we opened the SMS app, and we have been building, our journey has been building tech from the operating system level all the way, and at Motorola finally we ended up building mobile platforms, but we had never built a mobile app, right? So we were going up the stack. So at that time we saw it and we were like, hey, all the messages that are there in the SMS inbox are really from businesses, and this format of the SMS inbox makes no sense for you to read business messages, right? It's a lot of numbers, INR and XXX and your insurance, blah blah blah,
and the password
and OTP and all that, right? And when we saw that, we kind of had a epiphany that this doesn't make sense, and that quickly evolved into the Walnut app, where we realized that in India, regulatory wise, the banks have to send you the SMS for your transaction, just from a fraud perspective, because they have to inform you of everything that happens. Right? So every debit has to come to you as an and SMS is like the lowest common denominator, right? It will reach you wherever you are with whatever error rates, etc. So that was the thought that Walnut was built on. Very quickly we built the prototype of the app, and we saw real value in the fact that you don't have to lift a finger. The app, one of the metrics that we have is that within 15 to 20 seconds of launching the app, you should get an actionable insight. This was like a metric we had really in the beginning. So we did a lot of tricks for that, right? Very fast SMS processing. We would be having the most complicated and best SMS processing for financial services in the country today, which is built since 2014, right? So the history and the way they're able to do that. Now that was what we started off with. Obviously, we saw value. We could see these insights made a lot of sense. We got great initial feedback on that, and interestingly, around the same 2-3 month time frame, there were 3 companies that launched with a similar idea across the country. So we had it was a community of 3 of us who were building out personal finance based on SMS apps. We went on to become one of the most loved personal finance apps, and our thought process was always to give value to the consumer in terms of the insights and understanding of their personal finance. And nobody in the financial services industry has an incentive to do it for you, because your HDFC bank, for example, doesn't have access to your ICICI bank data, and your credit card company would rather you didn't pay your credit card and got their fees out of it, right? So no one is really incentivized in the financial industry to tell you what's happening with your finance. And that was where Walnut stepped in and gave you that. Step 1 was just insight, just knowing where your money goes. Before initial messaging was just know where your money goes, right? After that, it's once you know that, then the next step is, can you save, can you buy a financial product, or what can you do with it, right? That kind of was the journey. We always had this, we were very privacy focused, very focused on the fact that your data should not be shared with one. So initially through our journey, as we built our audience, we got a lot of finance services and banks coming to us saying that, share your audience data with us and we will send offers to them and all. But we were like, no, whatever it is, it has to be in the app. So we built out products on the financial service. We did insurance, we did a bunch of other things, and we also got into doing lending through partnerships. Obviously, we didn't have an NBFC license in India, so we worked with partners on that. And that was like the initial journey of Walnut, where we got funded and went through that. And then about 2018, when we saw lending was a big thing for us, we picked up a lot of business on that. We were doing, I think at that point we were around 200-300 crore of lending, which was really a pilot that we had started off from the lending side. Then we connected to the capital flow team, and there was a lot of complementary stuff that they were getting into the consumer space at that time. They started off as a traditional SME lender. The question at our end was, do we become a lender ourselves as the business grew, or work with someone who has gone through their journey for the last 4 or 5 years and leverage their knowledge, and they use us on the consumer side, build up the consumer perspective, and our roadmap selected. So we kind of got acquired by them. So after that, it's been very interesting. We've gone much deeper into the whole lending space across consumer and SME spaces. Now, Capital Float, of course, is Amazon is one of the investors. It's a self-funded company. It must be about 125 million raised so far. Through the journey. They're the pioneers in digital lending in India. They did digital lending when there was no digital lending. Right? Today, it's all digital lending. But they are the ones who initially brought all these processes online, underwriting, collections, and all of that. And today, actually, at Capital Float, we do, I would say we do the most amount of what is, BNPL, which is buy now, pay later loans. So we do majority of that in the country today. On the consumer side, of course, we have an SME business. We do ticket sizes all the way from, we do the Walnut product where we do personal loans for consumers. We do Capital Float products where we're doing buy now, pay later. We do personal loans. We are the only digital lender that has both ends of the BNPL funnel, right? We build consumers on buy now, pay later at checkout, but we are also cross-selling loans and other digital products to them on the back of that funnel. That's kind of where we are at Capital Float.
So awesome investors, awesome product, lot of a very diverse customer base, consumer plus enterprise plus SME.
Yeah, like MSME and small businesses and stuff.
And then you have the big India FinTech wave, which is growing over the next decade. Right. So rightly poised to grow.
Yeah, I think the perfect storm.
Perfect storm, exactly.
FinTech is that way, the perfect storm. And I think anyone who's been in FinTech for the last 4 or 5 years will be able to leverage it because of someone coming in right now into the FinTech space will have to take some time to build out. But anyone who's been here and has taken the pain of the last 4 years will now be able to take
I think the 2014-15 push that we got in
Right.
India, especially in the Indian startup ecosystem, in the amount of funding that came in, as well as the number of startups, right? People such as yourself who took the dive into FinTech or some of the other consumer tech sectors, right? Okay, so we'll just change gears a little bit and go into, really understanding how you do things. How do you build products? How do you build companies? How do you build teams? When you are thinking about a product, what are some of the things that come to your mind, and then how do you tackle them? Maybe just some thoughts around it.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts really there on building. So one of the things that is, I think, very cliched but very true also, is that you need a team to build stuff, right? And the thing about the team is that the team has to be equally excited about building it, and you should be able to get them to build out stuff for that also, right? And then of course there's an appropriate team size for building product at every time. So when it started out, it was just me and Amit building things, right? Then we quickly realized as we built it that we're going to need to build out, and then we got in more people. I think giving people ownership for building parts of it is important. More important is that when you are building a product, we get into the cycle of wanting to build a complete and perfect product before going out into the market, right? And that is never going to be the case, because irrespective of how good a product builder or a thought process that you have, the market always has surprises for you. The consumers always have like something else that they really want. And this is true whether it is a consumer product, whether it's an enterprise product. So the best thing you can do for yourself is take your product to the market in an unfinished fashion, in a fashion that you are like mostly okay and slightly embarrassed, right? And when you take it out there, the audience will tell you that this is what I really want in that, and you get so much more time to tweak it. So I think that is we end up trying to make everything perfect, and the thing is, though it would be perfect the way we want to build it, let's say we take 2 years to build out something, but then it is not what the audience wants.
How do you identify? Because I'm sure you have like a laundry list of potential ideas for products that you could build.
Yeah.
So how do you say, well, this is the one which is where me, my team, or Amit, we'd like to just, spend some time on and, choose this over some of the others.
So at Walnut, Amit runs the product. So it's actually, I follow Amit's call on what the product should be, right?
Okay.
Of course, I have a view. And but then in any startup you have to kind of allow one person to be the leader on one thing, right? So the bunch of things that I lead on, a bunch of things that Amit leads, and I believe a lot in his product philosophy and his thought process. So I will disagree with him, but I will go with it. And he will disagree with me a bunch of stuff, but go with what I am saying on those, right? But from an overall product perspective and thought process, right? So there are people who are very structured in terms of having 25 product ideas, writing it down, and I am the other extreme where it's not really about that. My product feel is a very gut kind of thought process. So if I have a product idea, I would spend some time in it, and not necessarily building it. So for someone who is, I wouldn't say necessarily get a co-founder. You have to build out. So first of all, you need to figure out whether you need to build a tech or not, right? I find the fundamental question even for a tech co-founder is whether they should build a tech. It's easiest for a tech co-founder to stand up and say that I'll build a tech for this, right? And actually, that may not be the right solution. Coming back to my earlier point of going quick to market. Also, evaluate what you need to build. And it's not always necessary to have a co-founder, but it's very necessary to have either founding members or members of your team who would have the same level of commitment as the founder, right? And then build it out. So let's say you're a business person and you're looking to build up. I have many friends who have built companies where they're not tech guys, but they have brought in the right teams and they've brought in people giving them ownership and been able to build great tech products. And the opposite has also been, right? I mean, we are tech guys, we don't know. Amit and me are like pure tech guys, right? We don't know. We didn't start with a business background, but we've been able to build business, and it has been on the back of team members who have come in and helped us, and we have learned along with them. So I think it's important. It's not about, I wouldn't say, go search for a co-founder, but do search for people who could join a team who could do that.
So what's the number one challenge that you face in this role as a CTO? What would that be?
I would say regulatory changes right now, because every roadmap is disrupted by something that the regulator comes up with. I think my current challenge in the last 1 year, Corona has been a challenge, but I think more than that, it's just this landscape.
So Patan, this has been a fantastic conversation. I want to change gears and talk a little bit about the person who's Patan, right? Because there's a lot of things that I could learn and a lot of people out there could learn from who you are. Right? And I want to know a little bit about who you are, what drives you, what motivates you.
Right.
We know Patan, the creator, the product creator, the entrepreneur, the founder. Very few people know about you being the photographer, who loves wildlife, who takes some fantastic photos of tigers from all across India. So I want to speak a little bit about what motivates you and some of your failures, your viewpoints on life, your guiding principles, because there's a lot that we can learn from you. So my first question is, you achieved some level of professional success. You've been a founder of multiple companies. Financially, I'm assuming you are well off. So what drives you today? What motivates you to get out of the bed and still say, I want to do this. I still want to build capital float. I still want to create products which impact millions of people. So what's your driving factor today?
Yeah, no, I think thanks for the flattering introduction, and hopefully people please follow me on Instagram for my photographs. But building products from scratch, I have found, is what gives me a high, and I think that is what keeps driving doing this again and again, right? So it's really driven by that, to take something where you have nothing, it's a clean slate, right? You don't have anything and then you take it. So I don't know, would I have fun building something in a Fortune 500 company? I don't know. I don't think so. But do I have something where it's just me sitting with a blank slate, figuring out how to get the first engineer in, looking for a co-founder? That I think excites me the most. And I think that is what gets, I'm a firm believer in the fact that if you wake up and you're not motivated to do something, there's no point doing that, right? Whether it's a job or whether it's anything else, right? If you're working somewhere and your job doesn't excite you, you're not going to be able to give full value to that both ways, right? You're not going to get the best value out of it. And similarly, I think that's the thing that motivates me. Just building stuff from scratch has been in whatever I'm doing, right? Whether it's photography or whether it's startups, it's always been doing stuff like that. So given some idea that excites, more than the idea itself, I think it's the process that I find fun. And that is what is driving me.
Personal finance. Walnut is about personal finance. And so I'm going to make this finance personal for you.
Yeah, it's like a cardiologist who died of heart attack.
So how do you view personal finance and what is your view on money?
Yeah, very interesting question, right? So the view on personal finance changed since we have done Walnut, right? And I would say what has really changed is the fact that I'm looking, and really the principle of Walnut is that you should know what is happening, right? So I have a much more awareness of what is happening, and I make sure that on a periodic basis I'm looking at stuff. But in terms of what money means, really, I think money gives a certain sense of freedom to do what you want to do, and it kind of decouples you from those things, right? Are you able to do stuff that you want to do, right? So now money. So for me, for example, I don't have a very fancy requirement, but like there are certain places where I would like to build out and have flexibility. The best thing that money allows is to be able to explore the next product idea without having the pressure of other stuff, right? That I think is what money has actually decoupled. So, the pressures of being able to build out stuff, also having to, run the house and stuff like that, that is decoupled now at this time. I think that is the freedom. I think the freedom that money brings is really important.
And so just on that, right, there are two aspects to it which you mentioned. One is it allows you to do what you want to do,
right,
and you're at heart a product.
Right.
So it allows you to do that without having to really worry about money coming in. The second is your passion of photography.
Right.
How is, what is your view on, what you need to earn financially, the amount of money that you earn, that allows you to do this while, managing family, the life.
Yeah. I think everyone has a number, right, in their mind that I'll do this and I'll retire. That number is mostly always wrong, right? So my philosophy is a little different. My philosophy is I'm not planning to retire anyway, right?
Okay.
So then you have to find out ways to do what you love doing. So will I be able to I'm not going to have enough money to not start do anything from tomorrow? Like depends, right? I'm sure I could scale down my lifestyle and do that. But the question is I don't want to do that. That's not the aim. So then the question is, do I have money to sit for 6 months and figure out what I want to do and take something to market? Yes, that is the freedom. That's what it allows. Stuff like so that number is a very kind of the concept of that retirement number. I don't know. I mean, I don't really believe in having a retirement. I don't believe in retirement. So retirement number doesn't make sense, right? But everybody has a context. and everyone's context is different, right? Some people have kids going to school, some people have like health problems that they need to manage, maybe their parents, and some people have liabilities that other people don't have. Somebody may have housing loan, somebody may not be having housing loan, somebody paying off their parents' loans, and the other person may not, right? So everyone has a risk. So you should not stretch beyond, like you should be able to calibrate how much is the risk you can take. You have to keep taking more risk in life, and you have to enable yourself to take more risk in life. But risk is bounded. The type of risk a person can take is always obviously limited by their context in life, and you have to measure to that. So you have to push the boundaries, but you have to understand those boundaries also. There's no point being unrealistic about it. And I think something like Walnut, for example, has taught me the collect the data at least to have a look at it on a regular basis, right?
Measure what matters.
Measure what matters, yeah. I mean, we don't know what you measure, basically. What you don't measure, you don't know. That's really.
I think it's a very interesting point of view. I was reading one of the books a few months ago, and it said the concept of retirement is actually less than 70 or 80 years old.
Right.
It's only in the 1930s, 40s, after the Second World War, is the concept of retirement has come through.
Yeah.
Where we say we're going to work till 60 and then we're not going to work beyond that.
Right.
And so all the retirement funds, the retirement plans, the concept of retirement is only 2 generations old.
Okay.
So that's a very interesting concept, and very interesting that you say, it's the whole concept does not make sense to me.
Yeah.
I love what I do,
Right.
and it gives me the financial freedom to do what I want to do.
See, at heart, I'm a programmer. I started programming like way back when I was in 7th and 8th standard, and I've always been involved in that, right? So, push come to shove, I'm going to be a programmer in some place doing some programming if nothing else works out.
So yeah,
No, and I enjoy it. It's like, I love programming, building stuff. And building stuff, programming is kind of the same thing, right? So, I don't know, I think retirement doesn't exist, right? You retire from something you don't want to do. If you like doing that, there is no question of retirement, right? Like Jeffrey Asset doesn't retire, right? Writes books. Yeah, he likes writing books, he writes books. So, yeah.
Now, my next question is, you're living in a place, we live in the city, Pune.
Right.
So I'm very curious to learn, you could have chosen to live in any part of the world.
Yeah.
Clearly capability is not an issue.
Right.
Finance, you would have figured finance or the money part of
Right.
it. So why have you chosen to live in a place like Pune?
I mean, I grew up in Pune. Really the reason I'm in Pune is I had a job out of campus in Hyderabad. But then I was pursuing my wife at that time. She was in Pune. So I dropped that job and kind of, the personal angle to being in Pune because we tried to figure out that. That happened and then, life happened and I built out from there. I think, so this was around 2099 and all that time, right? When the real opportunities to start a professional career outside Pune. Then of course I got into building products in Pune because of that and stayed back. The more recent, I think, drive for me in the last 4 or 5 years to stay here has just been family, and I found that other than the professional side, a lot of the connections and parents here and just being close to them, I just couldn't connect with being far away, unable to be here for a problem or in a crisis, and that kind of kept me here in the last 4 or 5 years. The other thing that happened is, of course, Pune itself has gone through a lot of change, right? And it's a great place to build stuff now. Now it's like obvious that you would want to build it out here. India itself has become the place to build stuff. Given the fact, I think the question is less of a problem. Why you're not in Silicon Valley in India? I think the question is not. India is so much more exciting to build stuff today.
So this has been excellent. Thanks a lot, Patan, for joining us on the podcast. We hope we are able to get you on board again and also continue this relation that we've built.
Right.
For all of you out there, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, do share it in your own network. If you found something useful, drop us a note, drop us a comment, drop me an email at dd@dasar.in. You can visit www.dasar.in, and over there you'll find a whole lot of resources, right? Actionable insights. You'll find the Absorb newsletter, you'll find features, you'll find tools, you'll find the podcast with guests such as Patan, and you'll also find level up videos. One new thing that we are building out there is the lounge section, which is a community space where if you are looking to build something, then I encourage you to join. so that we can create a peer-to-peer learning community space where we are able to share what we are doing while learning from others, either operating in a similar stage or in the same geography or space. So thank you again, Patan. It's been excellent to have you here and looking forward to continuing this discussion in the future.
Thanks. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.